Dear friends in Malta, this is Sukant Chandan speaking to you from London. Thank you for inviting me to your conference on the issue of Palestine. Sorry I can't be with you, but hopefully this contribution from me for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so will be of some use in contributing to the discussion that you're having at the conference. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me to speak, and also I'd like to send a special comradely salutation to our colleague and comrade who is also speaking at this conference, Dr. Adil Samara, who I have been reading his work since over nearly 15 years now, and I really consider Dr. Adil Samara one of the most important living revolutionary intellectuals of the Palestinian National War of Liberation, so much so that I would encourage everyone to look into his analysis a lot more and try to popularize it. Now, I've been asked to speak about Gaza and Palestine, and I'm going to just chart this back a little bit more historically in my analysis and the way I'm going to frame it. Because the Palestinian issue, while it has some specific characteristics that's unique to it, it also has many strands which are in common with other struggles across the global south, or the so-called third world. And that is the issue of the oppression which is white settler colonialism, which is another way of calling European colonialism, really. So while there's some specific characteristics, such as the fact that the British colonialists sponsored European Zionists who were for a long period of time outside the European club, as we can see the way that they're dealing with Ukraine, that the Battle of Ukraine, is it European and democratic, or is it somehow Eastern and despotic? And similarly, the Jewish people of Europe were outside the club of European whiteness for a long time. But after the Second World War, they have been admitted into the European white supremacist and colonial and neo-colonial club. And so they were used to facilitate the colonization and the usurpation of the native land of Palestine and the Palestinians for a colonial project, very similar to what happened in Australia, which the British conducted a white settler colonial operation there. Also in what's now known as Canada and the United States and other parts of the Americas, in oppressing the native and conducting genocide against the native people there also, and also across the African continent, particularly in places like present-day Namibia, Zambia, Kenya, and also Zimbabwe, which is formerly Rhodesia, named after a genocidal maniac of British colonialism, and also the most infamous example of white settler colonialism, which was the former apartheid regime in South Africa. And the reason I say that is it's important for us to tie the threads together of unity, of historical unity and present direct and indirect unity between the struggle of Palestine and other sections of our global struggle, to learn from each other, to see the similarities, to work with each other to defeat this common enemy of humanity, which is this global system of oppression that is run from Paris, London, and particularly Washington, although London is still very much invested in that global project of oppression. So the Palestinian land was usurped and colonized by these white settlers from Europe who happened to be Jewish and Zionists. And after the forced formation of the white colonial settler state of so-called Israel, which happened nearly at the same time that the British undivided India, the Indian subcontinent, into India, and then what came the state of Pakistan. And what good has that done the people of either countries in South Asia? Nothing, but brought, well, its birth was conceived through the killing of 1 million people against each other in and around the region of Punjab. So the British are masters of partition, be it in Ireland in the early 20s, be it in India in 1947, and be it in Palestine in 1947 and 1948. But the Palestinians, having up to the time of the establishment of the white colonial settler project there, the State of Israel that is, were subsequent hitherto to that time were actually led by forces which probably, although heroic and although resisting, probably didn't really develop the ideological and the practical organizational means that befitted a people struggling for their independence and liberation against colonialism and settlerism. So the Palestinian young revolutionaries were influenced, like so many people across the planet, by the inspiring and signature struggles of the people of the world at that time. And amongst them was the heroic struggle of the Algerian people against the French settlers there and French colonialism there, but also probably the defining struggle of that time, which is the heroic and historical struggle of the Vietnamese liberation forces led by the Communist Party of Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh and General Giap. And Vietnam itself was in the trench of this historical and great heroic struggle, supported by the socialist Eastern Bloc, so-called, and particularly China as well, also Socialist Korea, which is commonly known as North Korea, who gave fighters to the Vietnamese cause, as they did to the Angolan cause against the white settler colonialism there, against Portuguese colonialism, and also particularly against the invasion of Angola by the apartheid army in South Africa. So the Palestinian revolutionaries, who then formed the liberation organizations such as Fatah, led by Yasser Arafat, and then we had Wadi Haddad and George Habash and Leila Khaled, who formed the Popular Front of Liberation of Palestine, out of which also came the Democratic Front for Liberation of Palestine. These were revolutionary factions which were directly inspired by the ideological and practical accomplishments and struggles of this global struggle. And it's very important, I think, we place the Palestinian issue when we talk about it and when we advocate in solidarity with it. That is part of a global struggle historically and today, because part of the colonization of the Palestinian struggle itself, similar to which we saw in Vietnam and particularly South Africa, is a Eurocentric and neo-colonial forces directly and indirectly, sometimes through the NGOization and corruption through money and also political patronage, will want to take away the strategic direction of the liberation cause from the Palestinian people themselves, such as the South African people themselves, and place it within Eurocentric conceptualizations of that struggle, which inevitably leads to a weakening of that struggle, or at least a disrespect of that struggle. So Palestine is part of a global network of resistance. In 1967, when the white settler colonial state of Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza, the Palestinian revolutionary leadership of Fatah, PFLP and DFLP, who all came together in this federated structure called the Palestinian Liberation Organization, were then expelled to Jordan, the monarchy in Jordan, the pro-British monarchy. The British historically founded that monarchy, as they did all the oppressive monarchs and monarchical states throughout the region, particularly in the Gulf. Now, in Jordan, there was a confrontation between the Palestinian revolutionary forces and the Jordanian monarchy, which culminated in the massacre and the conflict between the revolutionary forces of Palestine and the Jordanian state, supported by reactionaries, by counter-revolutionary states in the region and globally, and of course by the West and Britain. And that incident was called Black September in 1970. So having been expelled from your own native land, the PLO found themselves, and the revolutionaries found themselves in Jordan. In Jordan, they were expelled into Lebanon after 1970, and then in Lebanon through the Lebanese Civil War and the war of aggression by the proxy forces of the white colonial settler project there, were forced in being expelled from Lebanon to another continent entirely, which was North Africa, to Tunis, the capital of Tunisia. So, having been expelled into several countries outside your homeland for which you're fighting for its liberation, then came about, by the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, this very controversial so-called peace process and the Oslo Accords were signed at the beginning of the 90s. This took place in a very difficult historical moment, which saw the eradication and the collapse, the disappearance of the socialist Eastern Bloc. Now, whatever one's criticisms is of that bloc, of which there's many criticisms which are valid, nevertheless, despite those criticisms, the Eastern Socialist Bloc was the mainstay, was the main pillar that buoyed up by all means necessary, be it financial, giving exile, military training, giving weapons, to the global struggle against colonialism